What's up everyone, Pritch here bringing you a guide on everything Hatchet and New World. First, we're going to go over the basic and heavy attacks. Second, we're going to go over all the weapon abilities, upgrades, and passives that can be spec'd into for both the Berserker and throwing trait lines. And finally, we're going to cover potential builds and fun weapon combos to try out. But before we can dive into any of this, look how tiny these axes are! Oh my gosh, I'm holding a toothpick here! Timothy, back me up!
Hatchet.
He's extra tiny today, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you one of the most broken weapons in the New World beta, the Hatchet. The Hatchet primarily scales off of strength, so the more damage you want to do, the stronger you gotta spec. The secondary scaling for Hatchet is dexterity. Let's start off with your basic attacks. The Hatchet has a 4 auto attack chain, with your 4th attack doing slightly more than your previous 3, but having a slightly longer animation as you twirl like a ballerina. The attacks can be fired off in quick succession for high DPS uptime. Your heavy attack is a wind up into an uppercut for a moderately spammable heavy. Basics out of the way, let's go over the trait line that turns Hatchet into an unstoppable killing machine imbued with the power of a demigod. Berserker. The first weapon ability is Berserk, and I can confidently tell you it's the strongest weapon ability currently in the game. Enter Berserk mode, which increases your damage by 20% while active. Berserk lasts for 15 seconds, then goes on a 14-second cooldown, and it's also taunt gem compatible, which means you can slot a Carnelian gem in your Hatchet, and when activated, every PvE ad within 8 meters will target you for 8 seconds. By itself, this is a fine ability and balanced, but once we start adding the upgrades, oh boy. The first upgrade is On the Hunt, which increases your move speed by 20% while in Berserk. Remember, move speed is everything in open world because you'll be traversing large stretches of land for quests, so 15 seconds of additional move speed is insanely strong. The second upgrade is Berserking Refresh. Gain a portion of your health back every 5 seconds, and since it lasts for 15 seconds, you gain health back 3 times and the value you receive increases each time. Over the course of 15 seconds, you will regen around 33% of your total health. In a game where your health does not passively regen out of combat, a spammable self-heal is incredibly valuable. The third upgrade is Berserking Purge, which allows you to remove any and all crowd control effects from yourself when activating Berserk mode. Incredibly, the ability to cleanse yourself was actually the most underwhelming of the upgrades because you tend to pop Berserk right before entering a fight instead of saving it for breaking CC. The fourth and final upgrade is Uninterruptible Berserk. While in Berserk, your attacks are uninterruptible and you can't be staggered, which is basically the same thing as having Grit while Berserk. So to recap, in one weapon ability, you get 15 seconds of a damage boost, 15 seconds of running faster, 15 seconds of health regen, 15 seconds of being unstaggerable and uninterruptible, you can get rid of any CC affecting you, and it only sits on a 14-second cooldown, making it spammable. Guys, if you even think about running Hatchet without Berserk, you're trolling. Mandatory, must-have, and this one ability will make the Hatchet a viable secondary weapon for any other weapon in the game. Thankfully, I will say, the moment you pop Berserk and then weapon swap, you lose the buff, so you can only take advantage of this insane buff while on Hatchet. The next weapon ability is Feral Rush. Leap forward, hitting twice for 115% and 130% weapon damage, and it sits on an 11.2 second cooldown. Fun note, both hits count as light attacks, and we're going to get back to that when we cover passive specs. The leap here is pretty short, and basically roots you when you land for your follow-up hit, so I recommend only using it when you're within around 4 meters of your target, which is basically when you can start smelling what they had for breakfast. Reese's Puffs. You can also use this ability for a small auto attack reset while in melee range. The first upgrade is Dispatch. If your foe is below 30% health, hit them 20% harder. The second upgrade is Crippling Strikes. If you hit your targets back, then they're rooted for 2 seconds. You do so much damage on Hatchet that if you pull a root off for 2 seconds, you'll win every fight. I personally like saving this for when people run away from me in PvP because the moment they show their back, I'm leaping. The final weapon ability is Raging Torrent. Do 4 fast attacks dealing 90% damage each, and it sits on a 14-second cooldown. This attack combo is much faster than your light attack combo, and just like Feral Rush, each hit counts as a light attack. You can use this ability as a quick auto attack reset. You're going to get about 4 attacks off in around 2 seconds, so basically, you do big damage really fast. The first upgrade is Aggressive Approach, granting you haste for 6 seconds when you hit something with Raging Torrent. Haste increases your move speed by 20% for 6 seconds. Unfortunately, how this worked in beta is you received haste once the first attack proc damage, and each successive hit didn't reapply the 6 seconds of haste, so you really only had about 3 seconds of haste once the ability ended, and 3 seconds of haste doesn't really do anything for you. The final upgrade is Final Blow, light attack at the end of Raging Torrent to deal a 5th attack, dealing 120% damage. Not gonna lie, I love the animation of the 5th attack because it feels like I'm bonking someone on the head every time it lands. It's pretty fluid and quick and does a solid amount of damage. On to the passives. Remember, both Feral Rush and Raging Torrent's attacks are considered light attacks. First, Enraging Strikes. Deal 20% more damage to targets below 30% health. Accumulated Power. After 3 successful light attacks against the same foe, gain a 30% damage increase on your next attack. Basically, every 4th attack on the same target does 30% more damage as long as that 4th attack occurs within 3 seconds of the 3rd attack. Relentless Fury. After a heavy attack, gain a 30% DPS boost for either 3 seconds or after 4 attacks. TLDR, do a heavy attack immediately into Raging Torrent for big deeps. Desperate Refresh. Every attack you do while below 30% health reduces your cooldowns by 2%. Keep this in the back of your mind when we talk about the Berserker Elite. Against all odds, increase base damage by 10% for every enemy within 5 meters of you. This passive is insane, especially during wars. And guys, this increases your base damage, which is stronger than giving a flat damage boost. In wars, you could easily get 10 people around you, which doubles your base damage on Hatchet, allowing you to do incredible damage. Berserk is the most broken weapon skill, and against all odds, might be the strongest passive in the game. Fortifying Strikes. Hitting the same foe with 3 light attacks grants Fortify, which reduces the damage taken by 15% for 3 seconds. Frenzied Purge. If you hit an enemy while your health is below 30% health, cleanse yourself of all damage over time effects. Dots include Bleed, Burn, and Poison, and this is on a 60-second cooldown. Finally, we have the Berserker Elite, Defy Death. When you receive lethal damage, instead of dying, go to 50 HP and become immortal for 3 seconds. During these 3 seconds, you can do whatever you want. Hit back, write a will, pop potions, pop food, cry, kill your enemies, ask a girl out, tell someone you love them. As long as you can do it in 3 seconds, you're golden. Jokes aside, this is incredibly strong in PvP, and you kind of glow white when it pops. You can pump a lot of damage in 3 seconds and can easily turn and kill your enemy who's probably dropped their guard to greed for the kill. And that's the entire Berserker tree. To recap, you have 1 ability that imbues you with the power of Hercules for 15 seconds, 2 abilities that hit really fast, and an elite that will turn you into an immortal. If you run the full Berserker tree, you will slaughter everything in sight and melee range while Berserk is active because your damage is incredible. Alright guys, a little mid-round break here to just say thanks for watching my video. Hope you're enjoying, hope it's fun for you, hope maybe I've even gotten you to smile. And if I have, if you're enjoying the content, feel free to drop a like, maybe hit the sub button, maybe even comment down below, let me know what you're enjoying. Alright, let's move on to the throwing tree. The second tree is throwing. Thought the bow and the musket and the life staff and the fire staff and the ice gauntlet were the only ranged weapons? Nope! Why do huge damage in melee when you could do mediocre damage at ranged? Before hitting the abilities, I need to cover 1 passive, Aimed Throw. Replace your block with an aimed throw, dealing 95% weapon damage, and each throw consumes 20 stamina. This is what allows you to throw hatchets. These hatchets can be thrown incredible distances, but you gotta lead your target harder than a bow at large distances due to the prolonged flight time. Fun note here, hatchets you throw will stick in your foes when you hit. The first ability is Rending Throw. Throw an axe dealing 110% weapon damage and apply Rend, which reduces your foe's damage absorption by 10% for 10 seconds. AKA, Rend makes the target take 10% more damage, and this sits on a 14-second cooldown. The first upgrade is Targeted Impact. Rend increased to 15% if thrown more than 8 meters. The second upgrade is Opportunistic. Rending Throw deals an additional 20% damage if you hit a target that's already got a debuff. This is just a damage buff. The last upgrade is Second Wind. Reduce the ability cooldown by 20% if you hit a target with a debuff. This brings the cooldown to 11.2 seconds. I'll go over this in Expeditions, but the only time I see this ability having value is in Expedition boss fights for increasing group DPS by 15%. The second ability is social distancing, which is the practice of increasing the space between individuals and decreasing the frequency of contact to reduce the risk of spread of a disease, ideally to maintain at least 6 feet between all individuals, even those who are asymptomatic. Yeah, what's up? Wrong thing. Nobody cares about the CDC in New World? Oh. Throw an axe forward and dodge backwards, dealing 130% weapon damage, and slow the target for 15% for 3 seconds. This sits on a 14-second cooldown, and I tried so hard to make this ability work for PvP, but it's just not great. A 15% slow for 3 seconds is basically worthless and has no impact on the game. The only time you ever want to use this skill would be to run away from somebody, but you're using a hatchet, so you never want to run away from somebody, and even if you did, turning and running is better. The first upgrade is Quick Power. If you hit a target that was already debuffed, gain a 30% haste for 3 seconds. And again, this is only useful to run away, which feels counterintuitive to hatchet gameplay. Stay Back is the final upgrade, and it increases the slow to 25% for 4 seconds. And call me crazy, but this doesn't feel incredibly impactful. Most people don't flag for PvP and then think, man, I can't wait to swap to Hatchet and run away. If you need to run away from somebody, you've already messed something up, and even if you do need to do that, Hatchet's not the best weapon for that. The final ability is Infected Throw. Throw an axe that deals 150% weapon damage and applies Disease and Weaken for 5 seconds. Disease reduces the target's healing efficiency by 30%, and Weaken reduces the target's damage by 10%. This sits on a 14-second cooldown and has a pretty long wind-up animation. At the time of recording, this is the only ability in the game that gives Disease. The enemy hit will have a green stank around them for the duration of the debuff. The first upgrade is Mortal Power. Increase the duration of the debuffs to 8 seconds on targets below 30% health. The final upgrade is Aerial Transmission. Create a 3-meter AoE that lingers for 3 seconds after impact, which debuffs anyone that enters the area. Let's talk wars for a sec. In 50v50, applying a 30% healing reduction to a group of enemies is incredibly strong at the moment, especially since this will apply in an AoE to multiple clumps of enemies. On to the passives. Critical Throw. You can now crit with thrown hatchets. This means guaranteed headshot crits or other random body shot crits. You also gain a 5% crit chance on any attack, ranged or melee. On Fire. Every third ranged hit is a crit. Rejuvenating crits. Every melee or ranged crit regens 10 stamina, and remember, each thrown axe takes 20 stamina. Refreshing Throws. Ranged hits on an enemy with a debuff reduce your cooldowns by 5%. Your ranged abilities will proc this. Exploitation. Guys, this is really strong. Melee and ranged attacks deal 15% additional damage to targets with an active debuff. Adrenaline Rush. Dodging within 2 seconds of an ability consumes 25% less stamina on the dodge. Boot and Rally. Any attack on a foe with a debuff regens 10 stamina. And remember, with rejuvenating crits, you get 10 stamina on a crit. So if you headshot a debuffed foe, you essentially get the 20 stamina back that you just used to throw the hatchet. The throwing elite is Persistent Hindrance. Successful throwing axe hits extend all hatchet debuff durations by 30%. Essentially, once you apply the debuffs on a target, you can keep almost permanent uptime on them if you keep throwing hatchets. We've finished covering up the throwing tree. A quick overview for the throwing tree is, shocker, you can now throw hatchets, giving you a ranged option. You can apply a plethora of debuffs. Most importantly, you have access to the debuff Disease, which no other weapon has access to. And your elite allows you to prolong debuffs on foes, basically for eternity. Congrats everyone, we got through all the specs. Golf claps all around everybody, and now we're going to move on to the builds. As always, there are a plethora of different ways to play New World that require different builds to focus on different roles, so we're going to start with my recommendations for playing the game solo open world, then partied open world, then expeditions, then 1v1 builds, then 50v50 war builds, and then finally, the one build to rule them all for if you want to do everything, but don't want to constantly change your build like me. First up, solo open world. In open world, I highly value mobility, sustain, and damage. I personally recommend a full Berserker tree with a 5% crit chance coming from the throwing tree. Use the hatchet in melee and slaughter everything in your path without a care in the world. Your abilities are pretty spammable and make for great auto attack resets off each other. The full Berserker tree will make you an extremely high single target DPS machine, but all of your attacks do have the ability to cleave if aimed properly. Berserk is incredible, and you're just going to run around popping it off cooldown for move speed and health regen. For weapon pairings, I Always look for weapons that scale off the same stat, so in this case, strength. The Great Axe plus Hatchet combo was the most broken solo PvE setup possible with incredibly high damage and sustain and maneuverability. The Warhammer is a viable second choice for heavy armor stuns and break bar damage, and it also scales off strength. Or you can pair the Hatchet up with a longbow or a musket for a nice ranged pairing to snipe creatures low, then finish them off with Hatchet's heavy burst. Next, now you got a couple buddies playing with you and you're looking for a partied open world build. This is mostly the same build, except we've taken the upgrades from Feral Rush and the passive from Frenzied Purge and slotted them in throwing just to get to exploitation. With multiple people hitting adds, there's a really solid chance that there's going to be 1 or 2 debuffs on the adds while you're hitting, and a flat 15% DPS boost is just too juicy to pass up. Weapon pairing options remain the same: Great Axe, Warhammer, bow or musket, but this time I'll also include a sword and shield. If you're looking to be the tank for the group and pull aggro when you can, slot a Carnelian gem into your Hatchet, and then turn Berserk into a taunt and run sword shield with heavy armor to be a meat shield. I don't personally think that Hatchet's the best tanking weapon, but it can be done. Theory crafting here, but if you did try to run tank, you should attempt to bring Rending Throw and Infected Throw with Persistent Hindrance, and while on Hatchet rotation, just keep increasing those debuff uptimes for your party to take advantage of. Next, we have Expeditions, which are 5-man instance dungeons. I recommend running Hatchet as one of the 3 DPS roles, but the build I recommend might not be the very highest possible single target DPS. That's because I'm recommending you bring Rending Throw for your team's overall DPS. Applying a 15% DPS boost for your whole team for 10 seconds is extremely strong and valuable, and while you might be able to personally eke out just a tad more DPS with Feral Rush, your overall team DPS will greatly increase from your Rend contribution. Just remember to be more than 8 meters away before using it so that it applies a 15% DPS boost instead of a 10%. Weapon pairings mimic Partied open world. You have the Great Axe, Warhammer, bow or musket, sword and shield if you want a tank, but I'll also include the rapier for expeditions because I believe that the rapier plus hatchet is probably the highest single target DPS possible in the game, as both weapons have incredibly high burst and sustained single target DPS. Special note here, the hatchet's secondary stat is dexterity, which is the rapier's primary stat. So if you ran this build, you could split points between strength and dexterity, or go full dex. PvE done, let's hit the PvP builds. First, the 1v1 build. It's identical to the solo open world build. If you run full Berserker Tree with heavy armor, then I promise you that nobody is out DPSing you while you have Berserk active. By not speccing into throwing, you also maintain the ability to block while on Hatchet, which I've found far more beneficial than throwing 1 or 2 hatchets. You just do so much damage that if anybody shows their back to you while you have Feral Rush, root them, hitting them with Raging Torrent, and watch their health bar just evaporate. For weapon pairings, there are 2 ways to play this style. First, Hatchet is the big melee DPS, and you just need to get in range to use it. For this, use a Great Axe to gap close and lock enemies down. While Hatchet allows you to run faster, it'll take you the entire 15 seconds of Berserk just to catch somebody, so let the Great Axe make up for that where the Hatchet lacks. The second playstyle is to use range to destroy your enemies and force them to come to you. For this playstyle, you can use either a bow or a musket, as both will accomplish your goal. Once they've gap closed to you, pop out that hatchet and whack away. I don't recommend the sword and shield or Warhammer with the hatchet for 1v1s because you're just going to get kited around and never get in range of your target. Next, we have the 50v50 war build, and it's finally time to whip out that infected throw and slap some disease on kids. Throw that disease on whatever group you're going after, and then get in there and enjoy your extra base damage from against all odds. Mow down anyone in your path with that. If you can time your infected throw to land as your team drops AoEs on tank lines, the enemy healers won't be able to save them. For weapon pairings, it'll be identical to the 1v1s with Great Axe, bow or musket, but for war, I'll also include the war hammer because people will be so busy trying to prioritize points, and you'll normally be able to land your long casted abilities with the war hammer. With the Great Axe, I recommend being a backline menace by flanking on the sides and getting into that backline, then opening up on the healers and casters and ranged DPS with your speed and burst to send them scattering. Once you've disrupted the backline, then turn back and whack away at the enemy tank lines from behind. And if you choose to go ranged, hard focus enemy turrets and machines, and then swap to hatchet when an enemy comes to your backline to disrupt you. Finally, you're like me. You want to play every aspect of this game, but you don't want to constantly swap builds around. You want one build to rule them all. You've already seen it before, and I'm going to show it to you again, the full Berserk melee build. Doesn't matter what you're doing, this build is going to slap whatever's in front of you. You are the Berserker, and nothing is stopping you. Constantly weave in heavy attacks to take advantage of your DPS boost, and watch players cower in fear from you. For the one build to rule them all, you gotta run it with the Great Axe. Hatchet is the extremely high, unstoppable DPS. Great Axe is the mobility and the setup and the AoE cleave. Hatchet will provide health regen through Berserk, and Great Axe has a plethora of lifesteal specs, so no matter which weapon you're on, you are always topped off and at full health. Plus, you get to say that you use the Big Axe and the Baby Axe together. Aww. Ladies and gentlemen, that was your Hatchet guide. I hope you found it fun, hope you found it helpful, and I hope that you are ready to go slap some kids with your tiny axe. Alright, I'll catch you guys in the next one.